I can definitely see that with that opening sequence.
Oh yeah.
Although we didn't have to wait till page 89 for a shag, I noticed. Hello and welcome to the show. Today's guest is a writer and publisher of horror fiction. We discuss the evolution of his ideas, taking a route through video nasties, top trumps and poetry. He's a lot of fun and one of the nicest people you can meet in horror writing. Today's fiendish mind is J.R. Park. Hi Justin.
Hey Jack, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah. I'm good. I'm
You've been behaving?
Excited. Yeah, I've been behaving. I've had a good day because it was the first day out since lockdown. I actually went into like a city centre and saw people. So you catch me on a good day today.
Very good. And I noticed you've had a trim, especially for me.
Just for you, I got this haircut. You're damn right. Yeah.
Excellent. And I've been tearing my hair, especially for you. So, so let's just dive in, Shall we make a start?
Yeah. Crack on.
So, Justin, when did you get started writing? When did you really get serious about it?
Okay, yeah. So, well, if we go back to when I first started writing, I mean, I have written ever since I was a small child. In fact, they were fished out of my parents' house. They'd kept them for me. Was my exercise books from primary school.
Right.
The oldest one I've got was I was 8 years old, and the first story in it is a kind of a weird retelling of the Michael Jackson's Thriller video.
Wow.
So, yeah, which is kind of, there's mummies in it as well as zombies in this one, but there is a werewolf in there as well. And that was the first ever story. And I've got these for about 3 years, and they're all horror related, sometimes a bit fantasy and a bit of a ninja in there as well, because it was the 80s.
Just chuck it all in.
Absolutely. But it kind of started off with me aping different films. So like Michael Jackson's Thriller video. I mean, we used to watch quite a lot of kind of horror when we were younger. There's another one when I was 8, which is called a story called The Maggots in Town, which is basically a retelling of the scene in Poltergeist where the guy thinks he's got maggots in his face and he tears it off in front of the mirror. So, and I was actually kind of shocked that we'd seen this when we were 8 years old, but different time back then, I guess.
I was RoboCop all the way at that age. So yeah, like you say, the 80s, man, we were just getting a hold of the videotapes. Did you have to sneak about, or were your mum and dad letting you watch them?
No, they were absolutely fine with these. Poltergeist was on TV, so that was videoed and we watched. But like I said, I mean, we watched Michael Jackson's Thriller video when that came out, and that was pretty gory. And then shortly after that, we saw American Werewolf in London, and that scared me to the point where I couldn't close my eyes and go to sleep that night. I do remember that.
I saw bits of that and I was shitting myself. I couldn't get through it when I was a kid, like.
But yeah, but I mean, around that time when we were kids, I had colouring books which were really gory, like monster and horror ones, which had people like kind of being eaten and cut up and all that. And I know we've chatted before about the horror top trumps that existed when we were kids.
Yeah.
And you look at the pictures of those, and there's blood and dismembered limbs everywhere.
And it was blatantly, like, you could see, like, they were pretty much based on, like, Christopher Lee and everybody, weren't they? Like the Hammer horror kind of guys,
yeah. I mean, I've got this little hobby of mine, which is all of those images are actually stills from movies, which have then been drawn out, except for the Godzilla one who's wearing a blazer and a bow tie, which I still never quite worked that out. But
I wonder if that's the one from the Chewits advert.
Could be.
Remember that?
But yeah, no, I mean they were all based on different stuff, and every now and again I see another image and I'm like, oh, that's where that one's from, because those have been burned in my head. But yeah, so ever since I was a kid, I was writing stories, and they were predominantly horror. And then as I kind of got a bit older, I was still writing fiction, but it wasn't really necessarily always horror. There's lots of other stuff going on as well. I mean, I studied English for A levels and then went off to university and studied it as well. The only unfortunate thing about university is it put me off writing for about 10 years. So I didn't do anything for 10 years when it came to writing, but I slowly got back into horror, and I went through this period, which I think a lot of people do, of trying to find all of the video nasties uncut and watch them. And as I got into that, I got really back into my horror again.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, I could write a horror movie. So I had this idea for a long time about turning Punch and Judy, the theme of Punch and Judy, into a horror film, because no one had really done it before, but it's ripe there for, there's a guy running around with a big stick and he looks ugly and horrible. So I sat down one day and came up with the idea and wrote this script out. And it was just a bit of fun. And it took me about 3 or 4 days to kind of write, and then I printed it off and I'd send it around to friends and they'd come back with feedback, and I built it up. But after I'd done that, I sent it off to a couple of film companies. It was just at the time when Hammer Horror had made it big again. They just released The Woman in Black.
Yes.
So what was that, about 2012, I think it was?
And I was, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, I was quite excited. I was like, oh, great. So I sent this script off to them thinking, they'll come back and say, yeah, let's make it into a film. And of course, I suddenly realized that there is a million scripts out there and not being read. And who was going to read my script? So my initial enthusiasm kind of waned, and I just put it aside and just didn't really think anything about it. And then 2 things kind of happened at once. One of them was I was reading, do you know Dark Side magazine, the horror magazine? It comes out bi-monthly. That had restarted back up, and there was an interview with an author called Guyan Smith.
Yeah.
A guy who did Night of the Crabs and all of that. Now, I wasn't that familiar with him back in the day, but reading this interview, there was all these different lurid covers, and it was like he'd written this whole library of video nasties as books. Yeah. I thought, well, this is amazing. This guy's built a career out of doing this. And this kind of publications exist and people still want them. So that kind of excited me that, hey, I could do this. This would be fun.
Yeah.
And then the second thing was my brother came to visit me and stayed with me. And he had, he got produced this book. He'd gone to India, and he'd gone around taking photographs of all of the things that he'd seen when he was in India. And he made this photograph book called Observing India. And I was blown away that he had this book. How do you do this? I said. And he told me about print on demand. So that was when I realized, wow, I could write a book, and it doesn't matter if anyone else sees it. I could create it and I can put it on my shelf. Yeah. Because the thing that always put me off was the effort of writing a book and it going nowhere.
Yeah. So you want something to show for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So with those 2 things in mind, that got me excited about the possibilities that I could do this. And then me actually going into actually the initial spark to actually start putting pen back to paper didn't come from horror or fiction. It came from poetry.
Right.
So shortly after these 2 epiphanies had sort of come to me, they sat in the back of my mind thinking away. And then shortly after that, I discovered the poetry of Charles Bukowski.
Right.
And I got totally obsessed with it, because poetry I always thought was boring. This wasn't boring.
I struggle with it, and I haven't read Bukowski's, but I've read most of his prose, but I've dodged the poetry.
Oh, the poetry is wonderful. You see, the beauty of poetry is that whereas with fiction, you've got a story to tell and you've got a lot of words to get to a lot of emotion. Poetry, imagine distilling all of those words down into the most simplest points to get the purest emotion out.
Yeah.
And so his poetry I absolutely adored. And I started to write poetry in that form.
Right, yeah.
I did that for, probably about 6 months. And then after that, it kind of kicked me off into, hey, I'm writing again. Hey, this is fun.
Yeah.
And so that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to sit down and write a horror book. And that's how I then got into writing my first book.
Very good. And what was that first book?
The first book was Terabyte. So although Punch was a script which I'd kind of put aside, when I came to write a book, what I wanted to do was I wanted to write something brand new, so a new story.
Yeah.
And when I was writing Punch, I was very much aware of a budget. So I was keeping things relatively low key. Whereas
Yes.
when I came to write Terabyte,
Yeah.
I was like, well, I can put helicopters in here, I could put car chases in here, I
Yeah,
can have
yeah.
exploding heads. And
And I
so
just read Terabyte, and it definitely is like it is like a blockbuster movie, isn't it? As a
yeah,
book. Yeah.
yeah. No worry about budget. Just throw all the good stuff in. I mean, I put a car chase in there because I remember I think it was Eddie Izzard making a comment saying, "You can't have a car chase in a book." I was like, "Well, you can.
I
I'm going
fucking
to do
can,
it."
though. Terabyte centers around a technological threat, doesn't it? And the horror stems from that. There's quite a lot of sort of body type horror, isn't there?
Yeah.
And sort of horrific effects from it's like how do I put it without spoiling it for anybody who hasn't read it yet, who's going to go to it?
Well, I mean, you can say about the basic premise of the fact that there's a computer program. It's pretty clear,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yeah.
A killer computer program. Let's put it that way.
And what its purpose is, it does serve a purpose. It has a very specific role to play, and I'll kind of leave that a secret so we don't blow it for anyone who comes to it. And I just wondered about why I'm homing in on that, Justin, is because I really liked things like The Ring. And for me, like The Ring is, again, it's the use of technology with the supernatural. It's not just a ghost, it's a ghost that's coming out of a TV to get you. It's coming from a videotape to get you.
Yeah.
And so here we have this technological horror threat. And I wondered, is that like a theme that you've ever returned back to at all? Do you ever go back to that, or is it something that concerns you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, the idea. I mean, the way that Terabyte came about was from two things. One, I used to work in a music shop, and I used to sometimes have to sit in front of a computer and do all the stock processing. And I just imagined in my head, like, what if there was these rogue places on the internet that you couldn't go, which effectively is kind of the dark web now, right? But what if there's these places, and what if these places could physically hurt you? So,
Yes.
so if you've got a computer virus, what if that virus could actually be an effect that could physically harm you? So where would that come from? And another bit was that I'd bought a external hard drive, which was a terabyte. And someone turned around to me in the pub and went, "Oh, terabyte, that's a really funny name for a horror film." So that's stuck in my brain, you see. So those two bits is where it came up. But the whole idea of technology as a threat is a really interesting one, because it's something that's really prevalent, and it has been for the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
And it's something that kind of people, it continues to grow like that. It becomes more of a threat. The more complex technology becomes, the less the likes of you and I, say, understand it. So it becomes a magic box. What is that doing? We don't realize that when we're online, or we didn't until Facebook admitted it, that they were tracking people. They were creating shadow profiles. All this stuff is out. All that information is there, and they can collect it all up. And people are actively collecting all this up.
Yeah.
And then what can they do with it? Everything's so connected nowadays. I bought some scales recently that have to connect to my phone.
Yes.
And so my phone provider now knows my weight. I've got a watch on which tells me my heart rate. It tells me when I go to sleep. It tells me where I'm moving around. The benefits of that is it gives me lots of great, useful information. But the downside of that, if used in a nefarious way, pretty terrifying.
Well, yeah, it's giving you that information, but it's also giving the companies that useful, helpful information too.
Absolutely. And people, we think we're okay with security, but there's a lot of things that people can hack into if they really want to, pretty easy. And that fear of technology that exists is out there. I don't see it a lot in much kind of horror, which I'm kind of sort of surprised at. I guess for parts of it is that it might kind of become outdated quite quickly. Like with the way when I wrote this, I could have added so much more on just within the 5 years that book's been out.
Yes.
But what you do see, the flip side of that, is that you see there is a big rise in folk horror.
Yes.
And the big rise in folk horror is because people become so reliant on technology, and technology's there, and it's this thing that we've now become a crux to. Folk horror, then, well, the countryside, that we are now so much further away from than we used to be.
Yes.
So that's the flip side to it that's kind of happening at the moment.
Yeah, I suppose, because the moving into the cities, technological based lifestyle, we've kind of othered countryside living, haven't we? And
disassociated ourselves with it. We don't understand. People might walk along and see a tree. They don't know what type of tree that is. Or they see some animals and they wouldn't know what kind of animal that was.
Yeah.
It becomes otherworldly. It's the other, and with the other in horror, that's great because the other is the place where the threat can be found.
Absolutely, yeah. Obviously, in Terabyte as well, we've got lots of different elements from lots of different genres. Really, we've got sort of the haunted detective guy, the sort of the broken detective. We've got elements of espionage in there as well. And I just wondered, obviously, we've talked about that you lean into horror predominantly. Do you purely lean into horror? Do you have any work that goes into other genres, or do you have any desire to write in other genres?
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, predominantly I write in horror. I'd mentioned about the poetry. The poetry is still something which I still do. I actually collected up some of my poems and released them as a book, a little book called "I Promise I'll Let You Down," which released last year, just because I wanted to get something out there with the poetry, just to kind of see what it would do. But when it comes to other genres in fiction, although I haven't written in them as of yet, there is a desire to. I've got many different endings of short stories, particularly which have been scrubbed and rewritten. My brother is my editor, so he's been my editor ever since we started, and he's great because he gets me, and we can have good chats, and he just tells me as it is. And more often than not, he'll come back and go, "You really want to write that James Bond book, don't you?"
Yes.
So I'll have just a big action ending sort of going on. It's like, yeah, that doesn't work for this one, does it? No, right, okay, rewrite that. And I do have this idea for a James Bond book, which I would love to. I'd love to write and just, I don't know, stick it on a website or something for free.
But just, it's where sometimes you get the urge to just do a piece of fan fiction sometimes, don't you?
Yeah,
I've got that for Bond and I've got it for Batman. Those are my two. And I just think I started in, I've got quite a sizable piece of Batman fan fiction, and Batman's not in it at all. But it's just something that I wanted to do, and then they went and made bloody Joker. It doesn't have the Joker in it either, but you do get these urges to.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice to do it because it's a break. If you're always writing in one genre, you sometimes feel like you're kind of sort of trapped within certain rules or certain ways you've got to make things. With horror, I've got to make this kind of scary, or I've got to have a threat in it. Well, what if I write something without a threat? There's an idea that's been bubbling around in my head for about at least last 3 years of a book. Well, I don't know if you call it a genre, literature, I guess you would call it. I don't really want to talk about it because it's not something that all I've got is I got a title, I got the cover of the book, I got the opening quote, I got the name of the main character, and only yesterday I came up with the opening line. And bearing in mind, I've been thinking about this book for 3 years.
Yeah.
And it's a book of the subconscious, right? I just let these bits drift in and then I write it down. And one day I might just sit down and write the entire thing, but I just have to let all those bits fit in.
Yeah. Percolate.
But yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, the thing with me is why I chose horror to write with, because for me, horror is a safety blanket. It's a comforting thing. I loved horror when I was a kid. I loved monsters. I still do. I haven't grown out of them whatsoever. and so when I came to write, I wasn't in the best place actually. I'd had a relationship that kind of ended, and I was absolutely heartbroken by it. So I needed a bolt hole to go to, and that was horror. I mean, you've read Terabyte. The overarching theme, what that book is actually about, is about grieving.
Yes.
It's about allowing the time to grieve in order to get over something, and it's no accident that happened. That's because that's where I was in my mind at the time.
Yeah.
But of course, obviously, it's all there's lots of vomit and blood and shooting and helicopters over the top of it. So it kind of makes it all fun. But yeah, there was a serious kind of, I don't know, almost psychoanalytical kind of therapy that I was going through when I was writing this book. And I just haven't left because there's just so much fun with monsters.
Got to play with the monsters every now and again, haven't you?
Yeah, it's like the adult version of getting your toys out,
Absolutely. And then we get the toys out anyway as soon as you finish writing.
I won't show you my Lego collections.
I've got the kids, and so their room is full of Playmobil Ghostbusters. It's all for them. It's not for me.
Honestly, underneath the desk, literally underneath where your head is now and I'm chatting to, is the Lego Ghostbusters fire station in the box. I've made a quarter of it, maybe only an eighth, and it's just sat there waiting for the rest to done. But it's going to take so long. But I can't do it at some point. It's for the kids that I don't have, honestly.
That's it. Yeah, it's just there waiting for them, so that you can tell them to leave it the fuck alone.
Yeah, absolutely, it's mine.
So obviously, like you've said, you were immersed in horror from a young age through movies. Obviously, the Michael Jackson video, and I just wondered, how much has Michael Jackson influenced? No, that wasn't really what I was going to ask.
The horror.
I wondered which horror writers influenced you, if any, and who were your favourites? Who did you get into first, or did you steer away from horror books?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So when it comes to horror, before I really started writing horror, I'd read less than 10 horror books in my time, but it didn't mean that I didn't enjoy them. So so the first major novel I've written, and I've got a copy of it. I can see it in my bookcase. Is a book called Slime by William Essex. And it was the one that was passed around the school, and in page 98 was the sex scene. Yeah, everyone, as kids, that was always something like that. So, I had that, I read that, that was kind of fun. And then I got into Clive Barker. And I got into Clive Barker because I've seen a still of Nightbreed. I was unable to watch the film, but wow, look at those monsters. So I discovered the book was called Cabal. So I picked up this book and read it, and I loved it. I still love it. It's still my favorite book of his. It's just the right size. It's not too big that it's overwhelming. And at that point, his prose was fantastic. If you ever read the Books of Blood, which I did only last year, the stories are wonderful. They're fantastic. The originality in them is great. But the prose is not as poetic as when we get into Cabal or Weave World or Hellbound of the Heart. At least that's how I saw it. So I read Cabal. That was amazing. Picked up Hellbound of the Heart and Weave World and read those, which I loved. And it's that thing that it was something new, something interesting. And like I say, it's that poetic prose, which I absolutely loved. And I still love. Weave World is a book which I occasionally dip into every now and again, just to read a couple of passages of it, just to kind of remind myself of just, what a good writer he was. Other than that, then I picked up a Sean Hudson book, Renegades. I think I must have seen it advertised, like in a magazine or something. So I gave that a read, and that was the goriest thing I'd ever read. And his books always started off, they took like a big death scene at the start and then put that at the front of the book just so you could read it to suck you in, which I loved. I thought that was great. And actually it was the memory of reading Renegades and like the splattery over the top deaths that I took the memories of those and I channeled that. That was my biggest influence when I wrote Terabyte.
Yes, I can definitely see that with that opening sequence.
Oh yeah. So
we didn't have to wait till page 89 for a shark. I noticed.
Well, no. So with Terabyte, I very deliberately thought to myself, this is my first book, right? And so what I said was, I am going to set my stall up right at the front. So in the first chapter, I'm showing you everything. It just catapults you into. All right, so this is what he's going to be about in this book, is it? Okay, fine. And it was interesting because when I was writing it, I was very aware of the fact that whenever I do stuff before, I think about like, well, what if my parents read this or saw what I was doing or whatever. And when I was writing this, I was like, no, forget about that. Don't worry about it. Just go for this. This is something you got to do. I'm an adult now. I'm gonna write these things.
I'm writing big boy stories.
Absolutely.
They can go back and read your textbooks, your little your essay books.
Although my parents don't read my books, they collect them. I give them a copy, and they like put them on the bookshelf, but they don't read them. My mum always says she's a bit too nervous to read that sort of stuff. My uncle did, however, and on Terabyte, when you talk about that first chapter, so my mum tells me that my uncle rings up and says to my mum, he's like, Glenn, have you read this book that Justin's written? She's like, no. He goes, well, I think you should know what's in it. She goes, well, I don't know. No, I'll pass you over to Bruce. It's my dad. So my dad then picks up the phone. All right, pal, what is it? And he tells him, and my dad just starts laughing. And then tells my mum, and my mum just starts laughing. And they're like, oh, for God's sake, he can do what he likes, honestly.
Yeah. I think they've got to put the big boy trousers on. But you know that one day they're going to crack those covers and they're going to have a look. And you're going to go around there for Sunday dinner. And there's just going to be fucking silence at that table.
They won't worry. My mum, after 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon, she got into reading all that stuff. So she got bat an eyelid at it. But you just mentioned about going back to my textbooks, right? So the primary school ones. Now, I this is one of them. There you go.
I see.
Right.
Lovely neat handwriting you've got there.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Now, I just wanted to mention something. So I'm 9 when I've written this book, okay? And there's a story in it called The Troll in the Krakow, okay?
Right.
The Troll is obviously been, I literally just watched Troll, the film, before I'd written it, which is fine. But near the end of the book, I'm going to read you just a sentence from it, because I dug this out because I thought you'd find this kind of fun. And it's about this guy called Billy, and he's got to go back to the house. And the line reads, he knew that the troll would be in his bedroom, so he went in his bedroom and saw the troll having sex with the dead dog.
Holy shit.
So that's written in this book when I was 9. Now, the amusing thing is, I didn't know anything about this again until I reread it probably about 5 years ago when it was given to me by my parents. And I read it and I turned around to my mum and I said, did the school ever say anything or contact you? And they're like, no. And the fact is, there is spelling mistakes corrected in here and a tick at the end. So the teacher clearly read it. So moral of the story is there was no hope for me. Right?
Jesus Christ. Oh God, I need to get that teacher's details from you after this. They're gonna be on next week. Well, we've taken a look back at the past. Let's have a look at what's coming up next. So, what are you working on at the moment? I know you mentioned there's a more sort of literary novel there that you're percolating with, but is there anything that you've got that you're putting together along the horror lines?
Yeah. So there's a couple. So I just started writing again in April because I'd been suffering from, and I don't want to talk about it too much because I don't want to turn into a pity party, but just for a bit of context, for over a year, I've been suffering from what they call chronic vestibular migraines. Basically, it means that I get headaches and dizziness every single day. They kind of sort of tailed off around about the time lockdown came in, and then they've kind of sort of come back in, come back out again, and I'm kind of working around it. But when they tailed off for a while, I was like, right, okay, let's get back in and do some writing. So I wrote a novella, and the novella was based on the first ever horror idea that I had. That was originally going to be a film before Punch. So the title of it, the title of the story, okay, it's one word, okay? I'll spell it to you and then you tell me what it is, okay? So the title is Tear.
Tear.
Or?
Tear.
Right, exactly. So I'm not going to make my mind up which one it is.
Right.
And the point is, because both of them are kind of horror-y type words,
yes,
but very different ends of it. So that is a theme which runs into that book.
Yeah.
So, but it's quite it's a nasty one. It's particularly aimed at more kind of extreme markets. And I wrote that on purpose. In fact, some of it goes so over the top that it's kind of laughable, but it's good fun,
Is this what happens when you hang around with Macho? Is this what happens?
Yeah, it could well be. But this one is, so I don't know if you've ever seen any of the Video Nasty movies.
I saw Cannibal Holocaust. I think that was probably the only one that I.
Okay, so there was one, and excuse my pronunciation of it because I've never heard anyone say it. I've only ever seen it written down, called Anthropophagus.
Oh, right.
Which is, I don't know. So I think it means like cannibal basically. And there's a loose sequel to it called Absurd. Okay, and it both star the same actor called George Eastman. And the it's the same director in them both as well, and he plays a kind of this nasty cannibal guy. Now, Tear or Tear, whichever way you want to call it, is but my loose third installment into that, because I always thought there should be a third one.
Right.
So that was the idea, and I've written that novella. That's kind of with my brother just to have a look at and edit when he's ready. And the book I'm working on at the moment is I'm working on a collaboration with Guyan Smith.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's not something I kind of announced that much. I talked to it on the Sinister Horror Company Patreon feed, because we always put the most up-to-date stuff that's going on there. But other than that, you're the only person outside of that I've kind of spoke to about it.
I won't tell anybody, don't worry. It's a secret.
Yeah, just between you and me, right?
Yeah, just us two, mate.
But yeah, so and that's a story called, well, the current title is called Beheaded, and what that is, the idea roughly about that is that so Guy came up with this idea because it was his daughter or his niece, I can't remember who it was, but they made this pottery head. And when they made it, they kind of gave it to him, and they, oh yeah, you got to put it on your TV or your mantelpiece. And he goes, that is an ugly thing. It's disgusting. So he then comes up with this idea of like, what if someone made this pottery head that was ugly but had no control over making it? And then he came up with this idea. And originally he'd written this as a short story. And we started having this conversation in this chat about collaborating together and working on something. And originally it was just going to be a chapbook. We thought, yeah, that's great. So he sent me over the story, said, okay, I'm going to add these bits to it. We're going to put it out as a limited chapbook. It'll be fun. But then as I started playing with it, I started realizing we've got a book here.
Yeah.
And so I spent a lot of the last couple of weeks working on it, and kind of writing like a rough draft of like the whole book, even though we're then going to work on it more together ourselves. So I've taken his short story, I've cut it up, I've put stuff in, I've created this book, and now we're at this place now where I need to go back over it and then pull out the points that work, probably bin off at least half of the words, and then go back with Guy and then go, right, okay, so let's talk about this story, this is what it looks like, and then we're going to have chunks of bits that then we're going to work on separately, and then we'll bring that back in and kind of, and then complete it. That's the plan. But at the minute, I've written this draft, and I don't know what it's like with you, but if I write a first draft, it usually comes out and I hate it. And I've done the same with this one. I absolutely hate this. And I looked at it and went, oh. So this week I've just put it aside, and I'm doing nothing to do with books. I've written a couple of short film scripts, but that's all I'm doing with writing this week. I'm having a break. It's very important, I think, sometimes just to put stuff aside, let it do its thing, let it become a solid thing itself that you can then come back in and tear up. So yeah, so that's where I am with that. So we're, I don't know, probably about a third of the way through that project. But I'm excited about it. So I'm working with Guyan Smith, man. It's going to be cool.
Yeah, I mean, you named him right at the top of the show, really, didn't you? So how does that feel to work with somebody that you really look up to?
Well, it's great. I mean, the good thing is we struck up a publishing partnership last year. So I speak to him once every week, once every couple of weeks. I mean, it didn't used to be. It used to be like he'd ring up, oh my God, I'm speaking to Guyan Smith. And now it's like, hey, Guy, how's it going?
Yeah.
How's the family? All that kind of stuff. So, we've become good kind of friends, chatting away and stuff like that on the phone. So it's just nice now to work with him. It's kind of in a similar way of like when I've worked with Matt Shaw.
Yeah.
It's like you got someone that you respect as a writer. They've got stuff they can bring to the table, and you've got stuff you can bring to the table. And it's about trying to get something which has both of your fingerprints over it.
Yes, yeah, definitely. When Matt was on here a couple of episodes ago, you have become a married couple. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, well, we talk a lot. I mean, we work so much on so many different projects. So we've written a book together, which was Postal, and I've helped him out on loads of film stuff ever since Monster. And we've kind of worked together well. And it's not just, I mean, that stuff is going to kind of it forms a bond. I mean, we became friends anyway. It was not just the writing side, but we both liked climbing at the time, so we used to go out and go climbing together and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, we're creating these things together, and from doing that, we have these conversations. Things don't necessarily always we see eye to eye on, so then we have these discussions, and it's nice because we've got that frankness that if we don't like something, we'll kind of say it. I mean, I know when he chatted to you on the show, he was talking to you about the use of the Nirvana cover of Rape Me for Love Life.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing about that is that I am one of the biggest Nirvana fans in the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when that first came up, I was a little bit kind of hesitant because Matt likes some good music artists, but I wouldn't call Matt a music fan like I'm a music fan.
Yeah, no.
And the fact he's a Guns N' Roses fan, and Guns N' Roses fans and Nirvana fans, we don't always get on. Yeah. So for him to take a song which he didn't he doesn't love Nirvana. He's quite open about that. Whereas
so
I
take
do.
Him or leave him, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, what are you going to do with this, man? What are you going to do with it? And we had these little kind of chats on the phone, and he did turn around and say, okay, let's wait till we hear the track. And I was going to say to him, what I was saying, don't put us in the wrong place. And what you're doing is just going to come across cheesy and wrong.
It sounded a bit on the nose when he described it to me.
Yeah, exactly. And I said to him, it's as subtle, I think I said, that's as subtle as a sledgehammer, mate. What are you doing? And but then when he spoke to the guy who did the cover, and when they brought the cover back, or at least the initial draft of it, I loved it. And from a Nirvana fan to then love this, especially because it's so different. It's this kind of much more kind of long, drony, orchestral thing with hints of Rape Me in it. And I well, that's fantastic. That's gonna work really well.
Yeah, so it's become something else.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was bowled over by that. But it was, if we weren't that close from working on these things, then what would have happened? He might have gone off and done this, and I'd have held a resentment for it. And it's better to speak your mind, and we've got that relationship, so we can.
I think when you're filming, when you're on set together as well, I mean, the long hours that you're putting in, you've got to be able to just have that communication there, haven't you? And
yeah, and it's really important. Now, it's an interesting fact here is you've got to know what your role is in some of these things. So I'm used to most of the time from creative stuff being the boss. I run the Sinister Horror Company. I put out my own books, so I decide what they look like. I decide what other people's look like with them, but I'm personally will ultimately have the final say. Coming into a film where I'm an assistant director, that's not my ship. So my job is to facilitate and support the director's ideas. And if I've got concerns, to raise them and find solutions for them as well.
Yeah.
And then it's up to Matt to kind of then he can take them and go, yeah, no, we're doing it this way. Or yeah, no, that's a good point. But either way, it's better that he's been told and he can then think about it. He's been challenged, and then he has to kind of defend it. No, I am right on doing this. And that happens. That's happened quite a few times when we do the films, but that's because, we do have different artistic visions in there, but my role isn't to run that film. So, and that's one of the reasons I think that really does help us getting along on those movies. If I came in and thought this is my film and that possibly can't stand like that, then it would fall apart.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you've got it. You've kind of forged the path together on it, and you found a way of working. And you're still working together, so it must be
two films down.
Yeah, very good. So you were together on Monster, and was it Next Door?
Next Door, yeah, we did Next Door.
Yeah.
And so we got the short one. They came from the sky. I saw them,
Yes.
which we're going to be filming soon. And again, that was massively collaborative. The title was something which I came up with a title, or I suggested a title. They came from the stars. I saw them, and Matt and I was like, yeah, but there's a band called that, so we can't necessarily use that. And then Matt they came from the sky. I saw them. So together we built that title. And the same with the script. I came up with a rough idea for this plot, chucked it over to him, and then he took elements of that and then built the script around it.
Yeah, it's a lot of exciting projects on the go, man.
Always busy. Always busy.
Bloody hell! I don't know how you're keeping track.
Well, the one thing is I am ridiculously organised. So, I by profession I'm a planner. I'm a project planner by profession outside of writing.
Right.
So, I'm used to keeping things on track, creating schedules, understanding timelines, Excel spreadsheets all over the place. Lovely.
Handy.
Can't beat a good Excel spreadsheet, my friend.
Well, before we delve into some Excel spreadsheet rabbit hole, let's pull it back to the writing. How would you say you've developed since Terabyte when we look at your most recent works?
That's an interesting question. So, I mean, all of my books are very different. Some of them kind of react against the previous one. But there is a common thread, which is my writing. Now, the way that I've developed throughout the time, I think, is that what I've been doing more is I've been the experimental side of stuff, the pushing of the narratives or the change in the way it's going to be written, or the taking of a trope and doing something different with it. Those kind of things have become more and more overt through the books as I go along. So, like Terabyte is very much hey, I wonder if I can write a book. Oh, I remember Sean Hudson. Let's kind of write something a bit like that. So let's get something really gory and really fun. And then with Punch, the idea was let's do a slasher movie, but what I want is a really big build up to understand how that monster came into creation.
Yeah.
And whilst doing that, I'm also going to mess around with the audience as to saying, well, whose side are you on? And so that was kind of my little experiment from there. And then when I got into Upon Waking, I mean, Upon Waking each chapter is a completely different character. And the concept is it starts off with them waking up and it finishes with them losing consciousness, whether that's they fall asleep, they pass out, or they die. And it goes from one character and then there's another and then there's another. And through that, you build up this experience of kind of what's going on. And so that was kind of the main concept. And then there was another one within there, which was, you've got in a slasher movie, the trope is there's a big hulking man running around killing pretty young women, right?
Yep.
So what I did with Upon Waking is I said, right, I'm going to reverse the gender on that. Big hulking woman is going to run around killing and chasing pretty young men. So you see, I've got two things there already, which is me starting to play around. The exchange end just went off into like an absolute crazy place. There's a secret code buried in the exchange, which I only tell people once they've read it. I say to them, and then they buy it. Come back and tell me when you've read it, and I'll tell you what the code is. And what it does is it answers some stuff that I don't deliberately keep away from in the book. And then Mad Dog. Mad Dog is it's about, so the concept of Mad Dog is there is a prison break. Prison break happens on a full moon, but one of the inmates in the prison is a werewolf. So prison break happens on a full moon, werewolves about as well. So that's the general concept of it. Okay? But it's told as if it's already happened, and so it's a series of interviews which build this up, and they're kind of cut up into like little bits, so you get these snippets kind of going on. So by that point I was being really overt in my experimentation and my challenge to myself on what the narrative is going to look like. I think a lot of this, my confidence in this has grown from my short stories, because I use those as playgrounds. They're like my my lab.
The lab,
or I pour little bits of chemicals in. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? And it just allows me to kind of play with a lot more stuff. So that's how I've kind of developed. What I'm trying to say is I think I challenge myself more, and by challenging myself more, I'm making my experimentation more overt, which readers seem to be enjoying.
Seem to be, mate. Seem to be. If you could go back and give your younger self some writing advice, other than, hey, watch, the teacher doesn't read that, what would that advice be?
Okay, so the advice would be that writing is a viable, it's a viable expression of art, and it is something that you can look to try and pursue as a career. So after I left university, I stopped writing. And I stopped writing because I became aware that whenever I would chat to people, oh yeah, hey man, how's it going? Yeah, oh, that's good. Yeah, what are you up to? Oh yeah, I want to be a writer. Oh yeah, what have you written? Oh, I haven't actually written anything yet. That's what people would say. And so I'd look at these people and I see these people as wastes of space, because all they were doing was they're just telling me, oh, that they're gunners. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I just thought, oh God, writer basically means just lay about excuses, just doing nothing. And so I kind of just got put off from the whole idea of doing it for 10 years because
Good
of
God.
that. And so so it would be just to keep going, just to do it and enjoy it, and because if I had done, I'd have a lot more work kind of written by now.
It's funny, isn't it? I think that myself as well. I think all the time that I've wasted when confidence has dropped and I've put writing back on the shelf, and instead of going, pursue this, man, just stay the course, and
Yeah,
I'd have so much more done.
and it's that confidence thing as
Mhm.
well, of like, do you know what? Just do it anyway.
Yeah,
Ignore whether you're confident or not. Just keep doing it, because some days this is terrible, and some days you don't like it, and then other days you come back, go, actually, that's fine. Or you just keep building it up. I mean,
yeah.
you talk about confidence. It's like with your podcast here. I mean, here you are doing it, but how long had you been thinking about doing this before you
Oh,
actually got the confidence to do it?
I was thinking about it for months, mate. There's silly excuses not to do it, and then one day I just went, fuck it, I'm doing it. I've thought about it long enough. I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm doing. I've got the gear. Just bloody do it. So I did.
Yeah, yeah, and it's that just bloody do it, isn't
Yeah.
it? You can
And
put
since
off.
doing that, I'm writing more. Things are coming together.
See,
Just
I
got
have
to.
a motto. I have a motto which I always kind of say to myself: the more you do, the more you do.
Yeah, it's true. It is true.
So yeah, you become more active, and so you go, right. This is why I'm doing film here. I'm doing a book there. I've got some music projects I'm working on at the moment, because you just kind of get stimulated by each one, and then
Yeah.
you go off, and you feel so much better for it as well, even if it doesn't do anything or go anywhere. Personally, for you, both mentally and spiritually, I think
Yeah.
you just feel better.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm glad that people are listening to the podcast, but it's for me, this is me having conversations with people that I find them interesting, or like, I haven't seen you and Matt and everybody in ages because I haven't been to conventions, and we can't do conventions this year,
Yeah, no, that sucks. Well, you were at I met you at the first convention I ever attended.
Yeah, I think that was my first one as well.
Was it? Yeah, Horicon
Oh,
UK, wasn't it?
we lost our
Yeah.
virginity together.
Oh, we did, didn't we? We did.
Yeah, that's right. First Sheffield HorrorCon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we were there again the year after, and I can't remember, were we both at Nottingham for one?
No, I haven't done the Nottingham ones.
You
There
weren't
was
at
a load of
Nottingham.
people went up for one of them, and I was gutted. I was like, damn, I missed out on that.
Yeah, that's right. Because I wasn't there as Dark Chapter Press necessarily back then. I was just there as little old me, really. Because there was like
There's
5 of us on a.
You're not little, but you're surprisingly tall. I always forget this, and then I see you, and then it's like I'm looking up.
Yeah, now I'm a big boy now.
Hey.
Well.
And it's descended. There we go.
It has, yeah. It's even Matt resisted this, mind. You're lowering the
I've
tone.
gone lower.
So, for anybody who's listening to this who they've never read a J.R. Park book before, what's the best jumping on point for new readers?
Okay, I would say go for. There's 2 books I would say to go for.
Greedy bastard. Go on then.
Yeah. So I would say go for the longer fiction. Go for Mad Dog. which is the one that I kind of talked about previously. And for the short stories, go for Death Dreams in the Dark. I've got 3 short story collections with Death Dreams in the title. There's Death Dreams in a Whorehouse, Death Dreams at Christmas, and Death Dreams in the Dark. But yeah, but the Death Dreams in the Dark particularly is kind of, it shows the kind of experimentation side of short stories, but kind of longish short stories.
Yeah.
Kind of really kind of, that's my latest one of my short story collection. So if you go for those 2 books, read those, and then if you're interested in anything else, you see, you can then go back and start looking at the rest.
Yes.
The problem I have is that my books are so different that sometimes, it's like someone who likes one necessarily might not like the other, because they might be of a slightly different thing. But it's worth that kind of check around. But I would say, Mad Dog and Death Dreams in the Dark.
Excellent. Especially since we've been talking about sort of that lab and the way that you work, I think people will find that interesting just to dive in and have a look at the nuts and bolts of how you actually put it together and what the experimentation is looking like.
What the frothy test tube bits look
like. Behave. Where can listeners find you online, mate?
Yeah, so they can find me in many places. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram under JR Park. Just search that and you'll find me. I'm also online. I got a website. If you jrpark.co.uk will take you to a landing page, which is a link, which then takes you to the Wix site. I just haven't routed the 2 together yet.
Right. Okay.
But if they do that. They can also find me on the Sinister Horror Company, because I run that as a publisher. And I've got, again, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages there, and a website. And the Sinister Horror Company website is where you can buy all the books directly. There's a bibliography of my stuff and all the Sinister stuff, and each page there's a book per page, a page per book, sorry, and that will take you to both Amazon or direct sales from us as well.
Yeah, well, I'm going to stick links up for all them on the show notes page for you. So thanks very much for joining me, Justin. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thanks, Jack. No, I'm a big fan of the podcast. In fact, I've listened to them all except for there's the Kevin Kennedy one, which I think just went up today.
Just today, right? That's just right, today, mate.
Yeah. So I'll save that for my walk when I go out next week.
It's a good one.
Keep me company on my long walks.
Yeah, he's a good lad. He's good company to be in. Thanks again, mate. I really appreciate you being on here. I'd like to get a chat with you again when some of these projects are closer to release, or maybe we'll come on and talk about Sinister Horror Company if you're up for that.
I'd love to. Yeah. I've got many a publishing tale to tell.
Thanks again, mate. Thanks for listening to this episode of Fiendish Minds. If you want to know more about today's guest, click the link below. It'll take you to this episode's show notes. Don't forget, you can get Fiendish Minds wherever you go, on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Castbox, or anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. Come and be part of the conversation. Join me on Twitter at JackRollins9280, or give the Fiendish Minds page a like on Facebook. Love to see you there. Thanks again. Bye.